In this video, I'm going to be diving into the biggest signs that you lack self-awareness. Let's dive in. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. For those that are new, my name is Christina and I help empower people on their spiritual and healing journey so they can have a more fulfilling and purposeful driven life. Firstly, I'm going to describe what self-awareness means. And I did previously go over this a little bit in this mini series that I'm doing of self-awareness. I just want to recap that just in case this is the first time you're watching this mini series. So self-awareness means having awareness of yourself, obviously. Awareness of who you are as a person, as a human, having awareness of your environment, awareness of your actions, awareness of your behaviors, awareness of your emotions and your physical senses. So this is what makes us different from other creatures, or even like, say for example, AI, because we're able to have thoughts and actually think about those thoughts that we just had, if that makes sense. So we're able to have some form of self-awareness. But most of modern society lacks self-awareness. And often you'll see this manifested in the world as like war, greed, crime, fighting, and a lot of victimhood. Because we lack the awareness of what we are doing, we are coming from unconsciousness. We lack the conscious awareness, so we are unconscious about our behaviors, and it's all driven by desire, maybe a desired outcome, an attachment to something, and it's ego driven. So this is why you lack the self-awareness, because the ego is in charge. So that is one of the signs that you lack self-awareness, is because you're constantly in your ego. That wasn't actually going to be one of the biggest signs, but that's still a sign. And it's hard for unconscious people to tell whether they're in their ego or actually having conscious awareness that's driven and making choices based out of their self-awareness or their ego desires. So how do you know if it's your ego? Because it's usually one attached to an identity, a feeling of importance, a feeling of gratification, a feeling of I'm important, because you've come from a victimhood mentality. So often when we lack self-awareness, it means we don't understand the cause and effect of our behaviors, the cause and effect of our actions, the cause and effect of how we show up in the world. Are you showing up through your ego and your desires, your drive for whatever satisfaction that it is? Or are you coming from a place of self-awareness, some compassion, kindness in the world? Because whatever you put out in the world will have an effect. And if you're putting out lots of value, lots of kindness and compassion, that's going to come back in tenfolds. And so there's always a cause and effect. So having lack of awareness will eventually come back on yourself. So one of the first biggest signs that you lack awareness could be that you are very reactive when you become triggered. You are triggered because of an unconscious behavior or a wound that you're not aware of, and so your ego has an attachment to that identity, that wound, because your beliefs end up forming your identity and your personality, and then your ego attaches to it. So that means when you become triggered, you become defensive and reactive because you don't like the whatever has triggered you. Maybe it's somebody that's questioned you, maybe it's somebody that's just triggered a sore in a child wound, and when we act defensively, we are coming from that unconscious behavior, and so we are lacking the awareness of that behavior. We're lacking the awareness of maybe a wound that's there, and so we are driven by our ego to defend based on your ego's attachment to whatever it is you may be holding on to. Maybe that's like your identity, your personality. So we have to defend these things because it's like, well, this is who I am. I'm black, I'm white, I'm Asian, I'm tall, I'm short, I have inner child wounds, I am spiritual, I am religious, I'm Christian. All of these illusions, these labels we put on ourselves becomes our defense strategy. We have to defend it because our ego says, well, that's who I am. And so when you are defensive all the time and really reactive, it just means that you are coming from unconscious behavior, and so you are reacting in an aggressive way. So my second biggest sign that you may lack awareness is that you have no understanding of consequence. You don't see the consequence of an action, of your behavior, of your words. And like I was saying earlier, that what you put out into the world has an effect and it will come back. So this means we have to have self-awareness of the consequences of our behaviors and our actions. And most people in the modern world have no awareness of the consequences of things because we are driven by ego desires, which means we become compulsive, we become defensive. So when we react or act in a certain way, or we become compulsive and buy that materialistic thing or do this, we have no awareness of what the consequence might be of that. So for example, a lot of our political leaders lack self-awareness because they become compulsive to start wars because they are driven by their egos, and the ego has the attachment that I'm right, you're wrong, and here we are at loggerheads because all their egos are bashing against each other, and so they can become compulsive with their actions and their reactions. So this means a war ends up happening because they lack the self-awareness. They're coming from their unconsciousness. And it's only until we begin to become more self-aware, we're able to have more awareness of our consciousness and able to ascend and have higher states of consciousness. Because when we are stuck in low unconsciousness, we have no awareness of what higher states of consciousness will be or are like. And I can be somebody that doesn't understand, and I can be somebody that has no awareness when it comes to consequences. I can act quite compulsive when it comes to money sometimes, not always, but I have been there in the past where I go, oh, I deserve this, so I'm going to buy this. And then later on, I'm like, well, there's a consequence to that. My funds are not so good in the bank anymore. And then we realize, well, the thing I bought actually didn't add any value to my life, or it wasn't necessary. It was just a compulsive buy. I think most of society can actually relate to that because we are driven by our ego's desire for materialistic things. And so when we buy from unconsciousness, we lack the self-awareness of the consequence of the purchase, whether that's lacking the awareness of the effect it has on the climate when you're purchasing maybe fast fashion, like I've bought clothes online before, so we don't really see the consequences of our particular actions, and it's a lot of the time out of sight, out of mind, and so we don't really have the awareness of it when we don't necessarily see it, if that makes sense. So my next biggest sign that you lack self-awareness is that you blame everybody else, you blame the world, and you become a victim. This one used to be me. I used to blame the world and blame everybody else for my circumstances. And that's because I lacked awareness of how I ended up getting myself there. And my own life circumstances, I was saying, oh, life's a piece of shit, or like everybody has it better than me, it's all right for them, they've got XYZ, or I would just go on this rampage and this downward spiral of victimhood, blaming everybody else. And it was only when I began to practice meditation, become aware of the thoughts that I was telling myself, and realized that I was in victimhood, that I was able to change that and have more awareness and stop blaming everybody else and taking responsibility for my actions, taking responsibility for the choices I've made, and actually doing something about it. This can be closely linked to the first sign, where you are reacting instead of responding when you are triggered. Because when people are triggered, what they do is they tend to blame the other person for their behavior. They say, well, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted or responded like that. And so this just puts that person into an unconscious state and victimhood, and says that everybody else is out to get me, everybody else is triggering me, it's their fault, rather than taking the ownership, having the self-awareness that it's their own limiting beliefs, their own wounds, their own triggers, their own emotional reactions that are causing them to be triggered. It's the wound that they're holding on to. And so when we are blaming, what we're doing is projecting all of our insecurities, all of our emotional pain onto the other person, because there is just no self-awareness there. And so this keeps us trapped in victimhood, rather than taking radical responsibility by having more self-awareness. When you begin to have more awareness of your reactions, your emotions, then you're able to have more responsibility for them. You realize, well, hold on a minute, I've just realized I was coming from an unconscious behavior pattern, and now I realize why, or I'm having awareness of what I am doing. So then you can begin to change it and heal that and feel the emotion of that wound, if it's a wound, or transcend the limiting belief. So then it has no hold on you. It's not coming from the ego. So there are just some 3 of the biggest signs that you may lack self-awareness. Let me know in the comments below if you know of any more signs, because I know there are plenty of more signs that will determine that you lack self-awareness, but I just wanted to share these 3 with you today. Don't forget to check out this video next, which this is the 3rd part to this mini series, and if it's not there yet, that just simply means I haven't done it. So with that being said, I will see you in that video. Much love.